Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Radio Dead Air Tech Q&A. You've got questions. We've got guesses. I'm Nash. Been doing Radio Dead Air for ages and ages. But in addition to that, I'm also an IT professional. With me, as always, my producer, Mike Garman, who also works in IT. If you have tech questions for us, you can send those to requests at radiodeadair.com. We'll answer them for you live here tonight. So hopefully you got a few. We got a couple. Not a lot, but we got a couple. Pardon me. Been a little slow. How you doing, Mike?
Too bad. I've managed to slightly throw out my back in a new and unusual way. In that, I can sit fine, I can stand fine, I can walk fine. I get in my car, my back hurts.
The glories of slowly rotting to pieces, the failures of the flesh.
Embodiment was a mistake.
It was. It really was. Like, so much. I'm ready for my synthetic now. Replace this shit, please.
I mean, you know, some Shadowrun level cybernetics without the true Shadowrun level dystopia, although we're close.
We are. Actually, which sucks.
Would be lovely.
We've got all the drawbacks, but none of the fun stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally be an elf. You'd be an orc. Let's face it.
Speaking of all of the drawbacks and none of the fun stuff, we have a lot of AI stories this week. Well, two, but still.
And two of three is a fair amount, and it's all stupid stuff. I mean, it is literally companies doing stupid things. But you know what? That's companies doing stuff with AI, going, we can do these things with AI, and everything will be great, everything will be fantastic, we'll make lots of money. And no,
this should
their plans are about as effective as emergency exiting a Tesla where power has been lost.
I can't do that either. Oh, if it happened to anyone but McConnell's sister-in-law, I'd be really concerned. But you know, I'll take the win.
Anyway. Because it happened to McConnell's sister-in-law, something will probably be done politically.
Like hell,
saying
McConnell, he's on his way out. They don't care. Anyway, we're what makes this first story interesting is that Microsoft has been heavily involved with OpenAI to the point where the companies, there's not a lot of daylight between them right now, which is concerning for a lot of folks for a lot of reasons. Even, I stopped clock here, Elon is suing OpenAI for this exact reason. Well,
he doesn't necessarily have a good reason to sue. He's got a reason. And his reason is, I'm Elon Musk and I should get whatever I want.
But he's basing on the fact that OpenAI has diverged from its stated mission, which is not something you could really sue for in court. But he's not wrong about that. He's just he's just sad that they didn't allow him to take him over. But the call is coming from inside the house on this one. Shane Jones, who is the principal software engineering manager in Microsoft's AI division. So not just some random schmuck at the company. He said he wrote a letter to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, said that Copilot designer produces, quote, harmful content. Now, if you don't know, Copilot designer is just a nice, fancy skin over OpenAI, their DALL-E and their ChatGPT.
Yeah. And yeah, that's basically all it is. I mean, I think it does a little bit of prompt filtering and things like that, but ultimately not much.
Well, apparently he was able to very easily get it to generate pro-choice content that was like pictures of mutated infants and a drill-like device being used on a fully grown baby and blood pouring from a smiling woman. And there's also drug content regarding teenagers and some just he was not even fucking around with it that hard. He was just putting in prompts, and DALL-E was like, I'll give you that. I don't care. You want drug-related kids? Yeah. Cool.
I mean, there was I don't know if it's still up, another AI lawyer bot this week, which the lawyers on Blue Sky, not the lawyers of Blue Sky, not their in-house team, right, but the lawyers I know on Blue Sky were feeding it all kinds of prompts, and they could get code out of it. You know, they could get Perl code and other kinds of code out of it. They asked it legal questions on a certain anime voice actor's case. And it did come back with the correct answer, which is better than the anime voice actor's lawyers did.
What? Initially, Jones brought his concerns to Microsoft in-house.
Yeah.
He did what he was supposed to do.
What you're supposed to do.
And they blew him off.
Which is a bad idea.
What this means right now is that Microsoft is essentially saying, well, we're not going to do anything. We're not the one developing it, even though it says Microsoft Copilot right on the product.
Yeah. So now he's trying to get the he's got the FTC involved, saying we need you to review them and change this and make this. I don't know if he's asking Microsoft to change the rating, or if he's asking the FTC to force the Microsoft to change the rating from E to everyone to mature 17 plus.
Well, Microsoft's response to this was, okay, we'll take those prompts down. Those particular prompts you were able to, we'll block those.
Okay, so the problem is it's a moving target.
Yeah, it is.
Saying, oh, we've taken these specific prompts down. All this does is cause the people who are trying to generate these prompts, for good or ill, to find an online thesaurus.
Yeah. What he wants is that he wants there to be a team inside Microsoft doing quality assurance, a large team, a massive one, to keep up with this.
You know what? Microsoft used to have teams like that for their OSs.
Yeah. Don't have those anymore. Now we're that team.
No.
The problem here is Microsoft has invested so much in OpenAI. They are desperate to see a return on this investment. And we're seeing symptoms of it here. I would not say, I am not a financial expert. Do not take this as financial advice. But if I held stock in Microsoft right now, I would get it the hell out of there. I do not hold Microsoft stock. It doesn't look like a good idea. What sooner?
The pension funds I have might, but I don't know.
Sooner or later, this bad idea is going to go bang.
Yeah.
And
to quote one of the better movies of the 90s, financial markets will crash. Oh shoot, I got this wrong. I should look this up. Financial markets will crumble. You know that the Mayflowers in Hudson Hawk.
There was a survey. I forget where it was. I was reading online. Public trust in AI is sitting right around 29%.
Yeah, it's there are Congress critters that are trusted more than AI, which is saying something.
The public has overwhelmingly said we don't want this, and it's not that we don't have uses for the technology. It's not that the technology doesn't have a place. We've already been using the technology for over a decade. It's just they weren't trying to market it as hyped as AI. It's machine learning. It's pattern recognition.
Advanced pattern matching.
You've been using it in autocomplete for ages and ages. You've been using it, if you've been using any sort of Photoshop healing for photos or videos, you've been using pattern recognition and machine learning. If there are audio plugins that repair bad audio, there are
I mean, technically you could probably call auto-tune.
Yeah. Super scaling and super resolution, FSR, DLSS. That is using machine learning to scale a larger picture up while retaining image fidelity so that you get faster frame rates at a higher resolution. We've been using this for ages. But what's killing it is this marketing hype as AI, because it's not AI. They're lying.
And trying to find ways to monetize it in every field. Say, oh, it is going to be the magic, the golden egg in every possible field. Anything. I mean, we talked about this several weeks ago with one of the tech conventions where everything was marketed with AI, because if you weren't marketing your digitally connected toothbrush with AI, people were ignoring you, even though there's no real AI application
there isn't.
for an electronic toothbrush.
The idea here, this push to this is the exact same thing. Remember, everybody put the blockchain. We have to have the blockchain and everything. And companies that actually did implement the blockchain had no idea what the hell they were doing with it, or they did, and it was such a mess they lost billions.
Yeah.
I wonder what's going to happen with this.
Lots of lost money. There'll be a few people who make out like bandits because they were in from the beginning, and they sold all their positions in it to bag holders,
like Microsoft. This is really good. I think
it's really interesting that Microsoft is going to end up being a bag holder.
Microsoft has been in this position for a long time, where it's been trying to figure out a way to monetize.
It's been trying to figure out a way to be something other than the OS company and the people who provide Word and Excel.
They've tried. They've had little fence and pokes to try to monetize Windows as a service.
Yes.
To be constant. Pay a subscription.
No one wants it.
No one. The revolt involved. So this is their way of trying to get another service monetized. Copilot, because you get like a free level, but what they really want you to do is they want you to pay for the professional level, which hardly anybody is doing. I can't stress this enough, and I don't know why the financial markets don't stress this. None of this is making any money. Or I take that back. None of this is making any profit. None of these ventures are currently profitable. Everything is running in the red. It's crazy. Speaking of, it's also going to be running the red, EA, Andrew Wilson, CEO, says after laying off hundreds of employees, says they want to implement generative AI in games, which is something that customers, there have been several smaller attempts that made splashes in the news because they were implementing this sort of generative content, the machine learning, all this. They were implementing them in games with the AI labeling, and they were roundly rejected. Either people.
Now, there's certain things that you can do in games with this sort of thing. I'm going to give an example. City of Heroes, which, as we know, is back, has a feature where it's like, hey, here's this mission. You go into a warehouse or an office building or whatever, and it's a pseudo-randomly generated map. Now, it's often done very, very badly because you'll be in this office. You go, okay, I've walked in the front door of the office. For some reason, there's a cafeteria right by the front door. Okay, I've made it past the cafeteria. There's 3 sets of stairs that go nowhere. And it's a corridor with offices on it, none of which open. And then another cafeteria on a 3rd floor, and it's supposed to give it a refreshing content. So the idea is that you're not looking at the same map every time.
Except most of these
it's more difficult to do than these companies think.
They think that they're just going to put this stuff on autopilot, when the truth is most of these tools, while they can be useful, they need to have a human hand on the wheel at all times, because otherwise none of this stuff has comprehension. None of this stuff understands what it's doing, because it can't, because it's not actually intelligent. It just generates stuff based on the data set it's given and the patterns it's meant to be matching. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't understand the purpose of the task. It's not intelligent.
No.
It's just they call it a plagiarism machine. Yeah, that's what it is. Just gibberish generators is what they are.
Indeed.
So this for EA is kind of in a bad spot because they've made a bunch of bad bets and they are trying to cut their way back to profitability, which never works. Never, ever works. When you're basically, you ever read, there's a Stephen King story. I know it seems like out of left field, but there's a Stephen King story called Survivor Type. Have you ever read it?
I don't think so.
It's about a guy who was trying to smuggle heroin on a cruise liner, and he gets the cruise liner goes down. He winds up on a deserted island.
Okay.
And he doesn't have any food to eat. He's got the heroin, but he can't catch any food. So eventually he decides to start amputating his limbs and eating them.
Oh, I think I have seen this, and he's using the heroin to keep himself from dying while he's amputating himself.
Right. That's what, because he's a doctor. So that's what this is. That's what they're self-cannibalism, little pieces at a time. It doesn't work. It never works. So wait to see if they try to pull this with something like that Mass Effect that's kind of waiting in the wings that they're promising. If they try to pull that with something, a beloved title, oh my, that'll be the end of it. I mean, we like, do we really need EA at this point? Is there anything we really need EA games for?
No.
Madden? Do we need? Do you need another Madden? We've got like 20 Maddens. Do you need another Madden?
I've never played it. Never played a single one of them.
Mike,
it's not been my thing.
Mike, you have to ask yourself: are you ready for some football?
I was, but I prefer watching it rather than trying to figure out why I can't throw the ball to the person I'm trying to throw the ball to.
EA has FIFA. Yeah, EA has FIFA. So can you wait? I can't wait for procedurally generated AI FIFA. Bob Dugnut. Remember that? You can see players with those kind of names. It's going to be beautiful. Bobson Dugnut. Yes. The first Mass Effect even had a murderous rogue AI in it. Of course. But like, isn't that the irony is one of the games that EA is counting on for money is a game about the dangers of artificial intelligence rising up and taking over everything. Except even more ironic, this isn't artificial intelligence. It's just gibberish. It's just
I'm just gonna say it. Now I say this on a number of our shows. I'm gonna place a marker. I'm gonna make a bet. I never go back and look to see. I don't write these down. But I'm willing to bet this guy's got 2 years left in this job.
Possibly.
Because he's making the bet. He's making a bet here that they're going to turn around and make a lot of money on this. And when they don't, it should be him getting fired. It won't be him getting fired first.
It should be him getting fired out of
cut a lot of worker bees first, but
all right. Well, last one. This is kind of me going, I can't believe you pulled this crap. One of the things I've been recommending to people in this era of smart TVs is instead of using the smart features on a TV, get one and never connect it to the internet. And if you need those features, get a separate device that you have more control over. And I've normally recommended the Xbox because it's based on Windows and you have a lot of control over that. It's not perfect by any means, and it does collect a lot of data. Let's not pretend like otherwise. Honestly, the best solution for a smart TV is to build your own home theater PC, but even then you lose a lot of features. So I recommended streaming boxes, and I have recommended Roku because I use them. We have a Roku in our living room. It's over the treadmill. We have a monitor set up there with a Roku so we can watch. And it was relatively cheap, and it seemed like a good deal. Well, folks, I am officially rescinding that recommendation for the Roku because this is one of the most horrible pieces of crap I've seen a company do in ages. Roku is rolling out a new terms of service that demands you have to go through their specific arbitration process. And not only that, it's about handling mass arbitration so that they don't have to. One of the things about arbitration, the unintended consequences, companies were, all right, I back up a little bit. In America, because we're insane, companies have this thing called arbitration. It means they can.
It's how they avoid getting sued for doing the stuff that they do.
It's how they avoid a court of law. They don't have to go to a judge and a jury for a customer who has an issue with the company. What they do instead is they hire an arbitration firm. The company that you have a problem with is hiring their own judge and jury to hear your problem.
Right. And this to get all around, like say, court, but most specifically, class action lawsuits.
Well, unfortunately, part of arbitration is if you are in the wrong, or even if you're not in the wrong, you have to hire that arbitration company to hear the case from your customer. If the customer doesn't get anything out of it, or if they have to pay whatever, but they still have to hear that case and you still have to pay money for the arbitration.
Right.
Well, people figured out that if some lawyers actually help customers do this, if all of the people with an issue actually file arbitration claims, it would cost them.
All settled separately.
All settled separately, and they all cost the company. Even if the company wins the settlement, they still have to pay for the arbitration. So It costs them a ridiculous amount of money.
This is, in fact, one of the things that's happening to a company formerly known as Twitter with a number of things.
So Roku is like, well, we don't want them to do that. That would cost us money. So they're changing their terms of service to cover and deal with mass arbitration and how you're allowed, bunch of people are allowed to do this. Only this is the scummiest change of TOS I've ever seen. A little pop-up will show up on your Roku device. If you do not agree to it, you cannot use the Roku. If you don't want to agree to it, what you have to do is send them a letter in the mail with all of these instructions you have to follow. There's no form. There's no form you fill out. You have to write it down yourself. Tell them, I don't want this, and this, and this, and this. There's nothing to copy paste. And the change of these terms, unless you do this, your Roku is useless. If you don't want to accept this, this is one of the...
Now, the change with the arbitration, basically, is what it is. It says, instead of going straight to arbitration, you have to try for 45 days to have a good faith discussion with them. Now, what this means, in theory, is that they would have to bulk up their help desk to have this good faith discussion. What it means in practice is they're probably going to build AI chatbots that try to track your claims and say, hey, this is a problem. Oh, well, and the reason they think this is going to work is because they expect that most people will give up before the 45 days and not go to arbitration. And in that, they are probably correct.
So, Roku's off the list. I feel like Roku is doing stuff like this because they're not in an excellent financial position. One of Roku's main ways of keeping in the game is they have Roku's pre-built into televisions now. Yeah. The little streaming boxes aren't doing they aren't doing the gangbusters like they used to because, well, your Xbox is a streaming box, your PS5 is a streaming box, your everything else can do streaming. Chromecast. So what I did personally, I ordered a used Chromecast for $35. That in the long run will cost, number one, Google doesn't get any money.
No.
And number two, in the long run, it will cost me less than any potential issue I might have with that, especially a security breach. That's the number one thing I'm concerned about. if Roku has a security breach with a login from Roku, because I'm canceling all my crap with them, if Roku has a login breach, that's the one I figure they would try to throw people into arbitration over.
Yeah.
In a bad way to get around the consequences. So don't touch these things anymore. I'm sorry, folks. If you have one on my recommendation, they were fine for a while, but their fortunes have changed, and that has caused them to do something incredibly stupid. I'm not even like super pumped about getting the Chromecast, but Google already has my stuff, and I'm just gonna be using, just like Plex and couple other streaming stuff on there. So I'm not particularly concerned about it. It's just, this is setting off alarm bells for me when a company does this. Well, this is not about piracy. I don't know why.
It's what oh shoot, what's his name? Cory Doctorow calls in shitification.
Folks, you cannot pirate a Roku box. Why are you saying piracy? This is not about content. This is about hardware.
Most of the stuff we'd want to watch on these things are shows that are out there that we don't necessarily care to pirate. It's just Roku was a most convenient way. Is it also on Google? Accessible on Google? Yes. Is it accessible on Plex? Maybe.
Well, but it's not about the content. It's not even about. It's about the hardware. You can't download a streaming box. That doesn't work. I don't know what you're trying to pirate here. We're talking about the box itself. That's what Roku provides.
Yeah. You wouldn't download a Carnash.
Like the hell I wouldn't. I'd download your card, damn it.
My car's kind of nice, so yes.
This is the little streaming box is the problem. That's the hardware. That's why I'm replacing the hardware. Anyway. All right, that is going to be the news for this week. Let's check in on our questions. I want to check real quick to see if we have any new ones or just the ones we already have for this week. All right, we don't have anything new. Let's just look at the ones we already got. That out of the way. It's over here. All right. Let's start with RJ96, which, all right, clever. I kind of get what you did there. Okay, with the handle RJ96, it's clever. Hi, Nash and Mike. I finally decided to break down and splurge on a U6800 XT, but I'm going to give it a complete once-over when I get it. I've heard that AMD cards run hotter than NVIDIA, so I want to clean it inside and out, which will mean removing the cooler. Okay, so I know I might I know I might ruin some of the thermal pads when I do this. How do I order a replacement? Is there a site that lists sizes and tolerance or whatever? No. All right.
It's unfortunately, but however, this is one of those cases where Reddit knows everything.
Sometimes. Well, it depends on what model you're. All right, let's break this down so folks understand what we're talking about here. Video card, get very hot. Need a way to not be hot. So they have these big hunks of metal with fans strapped to them, slapped on to the video card. But you can't just put metal against a silicon chip. You need some sort of thermal interface material. For the chip itself, that thermal interface material is typically thermal paste. But for the RAM chips, for the voltage regulation modules, for all the other parts on the PCB, you need some others, because you can't just slather thermal paste all over the card. You need some other thermal interface material. That's where we come up with thermal pads. They are these squishy silicon or some variant rubbery little pads that can transfer heat from one place to another. They don't do it as effectively as thermal interface material, as goo, but they do it well enough to handle stuff like RAM chips and VRMs and all that. The trouble here is, number one, they tend to be a little fragile. You can rip and tear them. Now, if they don't rip them too bad, you can just put them right back in place and they'll be fine. But if you really mess one up, you have to replace it. The trouble here is every cooler is different. Every video card is different. And there are the difference between the heights of the different components on the board means that to make contact with the cooler, different thermal pads have to be of different thickness to fill the gap.
And this is anywhere from what, half a millimeter to 2 millimeters?
Depending 3 millimeters. Some are 3.
Oh, 3.
Some use 3, which is not, the thicker the thermal pad is, the worse the transmission of heat is. So,
but it might be thicker because of certain offsets, or the only way they could mount something on there by putting something that thick there.
The other trouble is thermal pads are not made the same. There is no standard for this. There is a level of squishiness involved because there's a lot of pressure when you put a cooler on a video card. It squishes down flat. And the tolerance of the squishiness, say the thermal pad is ostensibly 1 millimeter, okay? But if the tolerance of the design is for a squishier pad that takes that 1 millimeter and clamps down on it enough that it's supposed to be a little bit, flatter, if it doesn't squish right, then other surfaces, particularly the GPU itself, won't make good thermal contact, and you will actually make the problem worse. So, the first thing I would recommend, and I recommend everybody do this, they're very cheap to get. Go to Harbor Freight or look online somewhere and get a cheap set of digital calibers.
Yep.
I
have a pair right there.
They are a nice little tool that pretty much everyone should have. They allow measurements of thickness and width, because, down to the millimeter level. That's the thing you want to do, is measure the thickness of each of the pads as you remove them or replace them. Also, the first thing you should do whenever you take your cooler off of your video card, take a picture of everything.
Yeah, take pictures of how everything is aligned on there.
Yeah.
And, what went where and how.
Right.
Because you'll be sitting there otherwise going, I think this piece goes here in this orientation. No, it doesn't go in that orientation. What's going in? No, it doesn't go in that orientation.
Now, as for
it goes here.
As for replacements, it's going to be trial and error. As for brands, I could possibly recommend trying. Keep in mind, these all have different consistencies. That's the word. Arctic tends to have ones they promise to be a little more squishy. That's company Arctic Cool. Well, not Arctic Cool, just call it Arctic. They promise to be a little more squishy. Gelid has some, that's Gelid. Gelid has some, they promise to be higher performance, but they're crumblier. They're like one-time use. If you use these as thermal pads, you're not reusing them. They get higher performance, but they're kind of crappy. Not crappy, but they're very specific for the utilization. Thermalright has kind of in the middle. There's another company called Air Hut. Only air is spelled with 2 A's. It's one of those companies. However, I've ordered their thermal pads before, and they're fine. They're pretty much run-of-the-mill ones. If you want to waste a lot of money, Thermal Grizzly has some thermal pads that promise to be the best in the business, even when you don't need that much thermal transmission, depending on what you're trying to get the heat away from. And they are also the kind that they get crumbly after 1 or 2 uses. So.
Now, when Nash says, I will point out, when Nash says a lot of money, for example, a 120 millimeter by 20 millimeter by 3 millimeter thermal pad from Thermal Grizzly is $20.
Mm-hmm. You're not gonna. You would have to do an entire video card with material from Thermal Grizzly. You'd end up spending $100 just on thermal pads.
Quite possible.
And it would not improve your performance whatsoever. So what I would recommend doing is trying to figure out I would Arctic's a good brand for this. You don't need the highest thermal performance for RAM. You don't need the highest thermal performance for VRMs. That's why they use thermal pads in the first place. You just need a general level of thermal performance to get the heat away from it. You're not going to be overclocking your VRMs. You just need to keep them within operational tolerances. One more thing I would recommend while you're taking everything apart to put it back together. There's a problem with thermal paste on video cards. It's a phenomena called pump out, which sounds really dirty in a weird way. When you have a thermal paste, a thermal interface material between the cooler and the GPU, the chip itself, it's a thin paste that fills in the microscopic pores between the two different surfaces. But as it heats up and then cools down, and heats up and cools down, some of that material can actually be pumped out from between the two surfaces to the point they're no longer making good contact anymore. It takes a while, but it can happen. I recommend doing what I just did with my new card that I put a water block on. There's a material called PTM 7950. It's from a company called Honeywell. You can find a lot of places selling it. It's a phase change thermal material. That's what the PTM stands for, 7950. The reason why is it doesn't pump out. It performs just as good, if not better, than some thermal paste, but it doesn't pump out. So once you put it on there, it doesn't come in a tube. Oh, you can get it that way. But it's also sold these little sheets you just sort of cut up, you peel off. You have to be careful with it, leave it in the freezer overnight, and then cut it and peel it because it's thermally reactive to your fleshy bits. Once you put it in place on a video card, you won't have to replace that thermal paste material so far for years, if not longer. They've tested it. It's been used a lot on laptops, Asus on there. A lot of the not Asus, it's Asus, the Republican Games Ally, the Steam knockoff, the Steam Deck knockoff. For any circumstance where you don't want to have to take the thing apart later, PTM 7950 is a good application. Because typically once people put a cooler on their graphics card, they leave it. It's supposed to be there for the life of the and because it's not like with a cooler on a CPU. Because CPU coolers they have a generic mounting. It follows a certain specification. Tons of companies make them. So you can swap those a lot. With video cards, very specific cooler for very specific card. There's not a whole lot of interchangeability. So it's the Ally, whatever the hell that thing's called. So the recommendation is get a set of digital calipers, measure the thermal pads, take pictures, write stuff down so you know what's going on. Arctic would be your best bet because they seem to be based on utility, which you get for them. Gelid is, if you want to put them in there and don't want to have to worry about taking, if you're not going to take it apart again, Gelid would be okay, but they will self-destruct over time. They're not as squishy. Thermalright's kind of in between the two. And PTM 7950 for the actual GPU itself instead of thermal paste would be a recommendation. Do you have anything to add, Mike?
No, that's about it. I've never taken apart a video card, so I've never had to do this kind of thing. But yeah, I've seen it done.
It's not a bad idea it's not hard to do. It's not a bad idea to do if you're buying used. Because if they're not well taken care of, there will be a lot of dirt and crud and other stuff in the fans, in the fins, in all of the parts you need to keep air flowing through and cooling going on. Cleaning it out doesn't hurt. And reapplying new paste and checking out this isn't that old of a card. 6800 XT is only like a year or two old. So it's probably not in terrible shape. But if you really want a used card, it couldn't hurt to do that. So yeah, it's a lot of doing it yourself. So good luck with it. And like Mike said, check Reddit. They might have some, depending on which model you get, because there are like 3 or 4 different 6800 XTs. There's like power.
They will at least have some advice in the general direction.
I believe there's like the reference version from AMD there, which is actually a Zotac. There's Power Colors Hellhound. There's Sapphire has one. I don't know who else has a 6800 XT, but there's a couple different models. You have to see which one specifically. All right. Next one. This is from Darren R. Hello, Nash and Mike and Floofs. 2 questions. I know you've said in the past that Bluetooth isn't a secure protocol, but there's almost nothing for phone audio these days that aren't Bluetooth, and there are no audio jacks anymore. Do you have any advice for running Bluetooth speakers and headphones while watching security? That's the first part of the first question.
Okay, so I mean, if you absolutely must, there's no real good way on security on Bluetooth. There just isn't. And the reason there isn't is because they would have to do an entirely new version of Bluetooth and then convince the hundreds, if not thousands, of third-party manufacturers to make devices for this new secure Bluetooth, and nobody wants to do it.
And then there's backwards compatibility.
Yeah, and there's backwards compatibility. Odds are good that none of your existing devices would work.
Oh.
Because I have the same issue. I prefer wired headsets, and what I have for use at home and here is home and work is this guy.
Yep.
It's a splitter, plugs in USB-C, has an audio jack on one side, and does power on this. Now, this doesn't look like a power jack, but that's because it's a magnetic adapter there. So I don't have a physical power connection technically. It's a magnet that pops off. Rather easy. And the reason I do this is so I don't accidentally connect my phone to my computer at home or at work, especially at work.
I just heard the solid snake noise.
Yes, that was my phone saying, hey, I'm not plugged into this thing, and I'm alerting you about something, which is probably a blue sky notification or something of that nature. That is my notification sound.
Yeah, Bluetooth. All right, Bluetooth. The security problem is not Bluetooth was never supposed to be wireless USB.
No,
it was never intended for the purposes we've used it for, but that's what it's become. And the problem really isn't. The biggest issue with Bluetooth is older devices, because most older Bluetooth devices never get a security update. Not unless they're like real super expensive ones, and even then, after a few years,
newer Bluetooth devices never get a security update.
Yeah.
Let's make this even wider, Nash. Most internet connected things never get a security update, and they should.
It's different when we're talking about Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi, it's not the most secure. There have been instances where the Wi-Fi protocol has been cracked. We've talked about those a few years ago. But Wi-Fi generally tends to be much more secure. And most Wi-Fi devices do get software updates. And Wi-Fi is more willing to leave devices behind, because there is earlier security on Wi-Fi. There are earlier Wi-Fi devices you can't connect to Wi-Fi networks anymore. WPA, original WPA, won't work with a lot of newer stuff, like WPA2 and other security.
It's not there.
It's not. It won't work. So there is security on. It's not fantastic, but security on Wi-Fi protocols is more secure than Bluetooth. Now, this is like this is like getting struck by lightning. Hardly anyone is going to try to find an exploit to get through your system via your Bluetooth hardware. But it's also not, it's the potential is there. And if a widespread hack happens, that's going to systematically hit a lot of people before they even know what happens. If you must use Bluetooth audio devices, or any Bluetooth device for that matter, my recommendations are: do not buy cheap ones. Buy brand names from larger brands. Bose, Philips, Beats Beats, large numbered brands, because those brands are more likely to keep up support for those devices for longer. There will be firmware updates if necessary. It's more reliable in the long term. So if you have older devices, ditch them. Do not, like, when I say older, any Bluetooth device older than 5 years, you shouldn't be connecting it to your phone. That's asking for trouble. Now this is a nice workaround if you don't mind using wired headsets and stuff. The little, one of these USB-C adapters. This is a perfectly good work. I use it on mine because I have good headphones. I don't want to buy wireless. I don't want to have to worry about recharging them.
And also there's a wireless delay.
Yeah.
Which in this kind of business is painful.
Yeah, there's even a wireless. I mean, because sometimes I don't do this while I'm driving, but sometimes I will watch videos in my car, and if I use the Bluetooth connection, then
they're not in sync. Video and audio is not in sync.
Yeah, that there's a buffer delay. So unless you have like the super high end devices. So my best recommendation is try to avoid it if possible. If it's not convenient, then don't go cheap. Understand that running Bluetooth is running a risk. It's not a gigantic risk, but it could be because it's just the industry is very laissez-faire about Bluetooth. They aren't concerned about it. There is so much idea when it comes to Bluetooth devices that they are meant to be disposable. You are supposed to throw these devices away and never use them again after a certain point. And in my experience, if you are working on a budget, that is just not typical customer behavior for a lot of people. Like, some people like getting the newer, flashier stuff, but other people are like, my headphones still work. Why would I replace them? Or my speakers still work. Why would I do that? Or my car stereo still works. Why would I replace it? So the best recommendation I would say is make sure your stuff is relatively up to date. Whatever phone you're using, keep that up to date with security and whatnot as well. And just understand it's the nature of Bluetooth. It's planned obsolescence. Well, it plays into planned obsolescence. It's also a matter of we don't want to update these devices. We don't care about them. Like when I say Bluetooth was never meant to be wireless USB, it wasn't designed that way. The protocol was sort of shoehorned into it because at the time these devices were exploding, those little stupid headphone earpieces that people were walking around with, and early Bluetooth mice and all this, there was no better alternative.
No.
So they just used it, and they've sort of shoehorned, reverse engineered it into that place, but that wasn't what it was designed to do. So, like, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was intended as a communications protocol, a data like Wi-Fi, but way before Wi-Fi. It was like early 90s that Bluetooth first came out. Well, not came out, but it was first designed. Anyway. All right. And the other one is, do you have good, cheap gaming mice recommendations? Yes.
So I'm not sure there is such a thing as a particularly cheap gaming mouse. There are some that are less expensive.
Let's see. Well, for gaming mice, wireless you're not going to get a cheap wireless gaming mouse.
No. And I personally don't like wireless mice because, again, I don't want to be replacing batteries constantly.
But
I especially don't want to be replacing batteries in the middle of something important, like, I was in the middle of that rare's going to get away.
If you want one that's going to be a good long-term one that constantly, quite often goes on sale, it's been routine. The Logitech G502. It's a workhorse. It's a mainstay. You can get it for right now. It's going for $45, but for any given sale, I've seen it go down as low as $35. That's going to be a mouse that'll last you forever. Well,
yeah. So we'll say the occasional bad thing about Logitech software, because the Logitech software is not spectacular. but their hardware is pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm using the G502X, which is a newer version of it, which is wireless. But if you don't want to spend this much on a mouse, then the G502 wired is straight up. It's lasted. It's got the form factor's good. It's got plenty of buttons, plenty of options. The responds well. Has weight. You can add weights to it to make it heavier or lighter depending on your preference. Some people like a heavy mouse, some people like it really light. It's got a good sensor in it. It's got good polling. Yeah, and they'll last a while. Once you have a G502, you probably, unless it starts failing, and they do fail if you use it's got a button. It's got a mechanical button switch. You click it a bunch of times, eventually it's going to fail. But yes. I will warn you, however, and this goes for any mouse that has a wheel on it. If you have a cat, be aware that you may end up with issues with a mouse wheel, because I have had this happen with my old G502. It hasn't happened with this one yet, but Grady's fur would drift into the wheel
and gum it up,
get wrapped around that little axle in there. And I would occasionally have to go in, disassemble the mouse, and snip out Grady's fur that had been wrapped that was keeping the mouse wheel from spinning. I will say this new one.
This doesn't happen as often with short hair cats.
No, just Grady's long haired, well, medium hair, but still.
Grady's a hippie.
Yeah, he's floofy.
I got no room to talk.
So that's been the only issue I had with it. If you have a cat or a long hair cat, it's not probably going to be an issue there. So yeah, it's a reason. Like right now, you can get it for $45, which is a little pricey, but it's a gaming mouse, so it's going to perform a little better, and it'll last a while. But if you wait for any kind of sale, you will see these drop down as low as $35. Like the G502 here, you're going to find it for a respectable price. So it's not that kind of mouse grading, no. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend. All right, I think that is everything for this week. Yeah, it's there. Let's see. We get anything else new come in? And it looks like no, that's it. Just those. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us for this week. We'll be back next Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you have tech questions for me and Mike, send those to requests at radiodeadair.com. We'll do our best to put those on for you. Until then, for Mike and myself, we'll see you next time. Good night.